you have your Bibles, we're going to start in Genesis 1 and spend a little bit of time in Genesis 3. So if you want to be turning over there to the first pages in your Bible, that's where we will start. So when you see this in your rear view, what's your first reaction? Are you going to go ahead and reach for your license and your registration and proof of insurance? Or are you going to start, like probably the rest of us, and start trying to make some excuses about why you were driving so fast? Well, I didn't know that it was a 35-mile-an-hour zone. Well, you were going 60. Well, okay, sorry, my bad. You try to make excuses about what it is. One that happened in our family pretty recently was, I won't tell you who, but one of the spouses had to drive the other spouse's vehicle for a day. And apparently the spouse who loaned the vehicle to the other spouse is not very good about carrying proof of insurance or getting their tags redone whenever it's time to do that. It's not my fault that they were 4 months out of date, but it wasn't my ticket either. So we blame, right? And sometimes blame is deserved, sometimes blame is not deserved, and I'll leave you to be the judge about who deserves the blame in that, as long as you get it right. But we blame. We are, whether it's traffic stop or some other problem or mistake or sin that we've got in our lives, we are probably pretty good about putting the blame on somebody else. And that's who we are at times. We don't like to accept responsibility. We don't like to say, my bad. That's a phrase we don't hear probably enough in our world. And so that's getting us into a lot of problems at times. Maybe it's the cause of a lot of our problems. And so what I want us to start with, I think, is the foundational understanding that we're really good at outsourcing our blame to other people. My mistakes, my problems, my faults, my sins, we're all pretty good about saying, well, it's because of what somebody else did. It's because of what they made me do. It's because they were angry with me and I had to, give it right back to them because I couldn't let them win one over on me. Whatever it is, we're pretty good about taking our mistakes, our problems, our faults, our sins, and blaming them somewhere else, as long as it's not on me. And what that does when that happens is it helps us avoid the root of the problem, which is really not you and somebody else or those people or that action that they did. It's not the root. The root is probably inside of us. And so as Paul mentioned, I noticed, Paul, you didn't wear boots. You didn't show up in boots. So the root is somewhere that's inside of us, but it actually goes back further than that. And so we can blame it all on our roots inside of us. We can blame it all on the roots that we're going to read about in Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 3. But as long as we're going to look at these roots, let's just not blame it on them. Let's learn a little bit from them as well. So in Genesis chapter 1, you have these people who are created by God, and He creates the earth, and it's good. And He creates the sun, moon, and stars, and it's good. And He creates vegetation, and it's good. And He creates animals, and it's good. And He creates humans. And by the end of this whole 6 days of creation, you've got this whole situation in this created world that God has made. And God finally says, well, this is very good. I got the humans, and I got the plants, and I got the sun, and the stars, and the moon, and everything's here, and it's ordered, and it's very good. And He goes to the people in Genesis 1, 26 through 29, and He says, here's your job. You got one job. It's to go, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it, rule over this creation that God has given them. And He says, look, I've given you the plants, I've given you all this stuff, I've given everything that you need into your hands. Your one job is to go, be my image bearers in the world, reflect my creation, go out there, fill the earth, subdue it. That's your job. Here's one job that you can't do. There's this tree in the middle of the garden. It's the tree of knowing good and evil. And He says, you shall not eat of the fruit of that tree. He doesn't tell us why, doesn't give us really any explanation about why you stay away from that tree and why that's the only one that you can't eat of. Just that don't do that, because in the day that you eat of it, God says you shall surely die. So I said you had one job. Really, you had two jobs. Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it, and don't eat of the fruit of that tree. Now, Genesis chapter 3. I don't know how far we're into the game here. I don't know how far they have made it, how long this has taken to get from Genesis 1 to Genesis 3. But then the serpent, verse 1, was more crafty than any other beast of the field that the Lord God had made. And he said to the woman, did God actually say, you shall not eat of any tree in the garden? And the woman said to the serpent, we may eat of the fruit of the tree in the garden, but God said, you shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that's in the midst of the garden, neither shall you touch it, lest you die. But the serpent said to the woman, "You will not surely die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, and you'll know good and evil." And so when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was delight to the eyes, and that the tree was desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate, and she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. And the eyes of both of them were opened. They knew they were naked, and so they sewed fig leaves together, and they made themselves loincloths. We're on the very brink of creation, and here are these people who've been charged, just don't eat of that fruit that's on the tree. But here's the serpent who comes in. He's more crafty than they are, and he comes in and he says, "Did God really say that you shouldn't eat of the fruit?" Well, Eve says, "He said we shouldn't eat of it, and we shouldn't even touch it." And the serpent says, "No, God didn't mean that. What he meant is that you're going to be like him. You eat of this, he doesn't want you to be like him, but if you eat that fruit, you're going to know good and evil, and so you are then going to be just like God. And God didn't want you to be like him, and so you need to eat this fruit." And then Eve looks, and, well, the fruit looks good, and it's going to be good for us, and I think it's really going to taste good, and so I'm going to eat some of it, and here, Adam, you can eat some of it. And when they eat of it, their eyes are opened. They know that they've got some shame associated with their lives now. And so they're going to go hide themselves. So let's pick up verse 8. "And they heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day. And the man and his wife, they hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God among the trees of the garden. But the Lord God called to the man, and he said to him, 'Where are you?' And he said, 'I heard the sound of you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked and I hid myself.' And he said, 'Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten of the tree that I commanded you not to eat?' And the man said, 'Well, the woman whom you gave to be with me, she gave me the fruit of the tree, and I ate.' And then the Lord God said to the woman, 'What is it that you've done?' The woman said, 'Well, the serpent deceived me, and I ate.'" Okay, so there's the story. And it's the oldest game in the world. These people are charged. You got one job. Don't eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge and good and evil. That's all you got to do. It's all you got to stay away from. But it looks so good, and it's going to feel so good. And man, I think it's going to taste so good. And so I want to eat some of that fruit. And that's why. If we would have gone to Eve and said, "Why did you eat of the fruit?" a logical answer would have been, "Well, it looked good," right? A logical answer, if you go and say, "Adam, why did you eat of the fruit that God told you not to eat of?" a pretty logical, rational response would be, "I wanted to do it. It looked good, and I thought it was going to taste good, and it was going to make me wise. I wanted to. And so the root of why I did this is I did this. It was my decision. It was my choice. I could have said no, like you told me to do, but I said yes because I wanted to do it." In fact, when you read the writings of James in the New Testament, James chapter 1, he says that temptation is tempting not just because it looks good and it's going to taste good and it feels good. He says it's tempting because we have this internal desire, a root of desire within ourselves, and we are drawn away and enticed by those desires. So if we're looking for the root of why I do what I do and why I fall where I fall and why I sin like I sin and why temptation is tempting, then it's inside. The root is here. And so if we said, "Adam, Eve, why did you eat the fruit?" a logical, rational response, "Well, because I wanted to, because it looked good to me. I thought it was going to taste good, and I thought it was going to be good for us." But that's not what they did, is it? Whenever God went to Adam and he said, "Adam, did you eat of the fruit that I told you not to eat? You had one job. Did you really eat the fruit that I told you to stay away from?" And what did Adam say? Did he say, "Yes, it looked good"? No. Did he say, "Yes, because I thought it was going to be very, very tasty. It was going to be really good for my stomach, and it was going to be good for us"? No, that's not what he said. What did he say? He said, "It was that woman that you put here." Okay, Adam, did you eat it? Well, it was her. Okay, so God moves on down the line, right? And if you keep reading there, he says to Eve, "Eve, did you eat of the fruit that I told you not to eat?" And what did Eve say? Did she say, "Yes, Lord, it looked so good, it tasted so good, it was going to be so good for us"? Is that what? No. She said, "It was the serpent that you gave us," right? And so, Adam, what did you do? "Well, I did what Eve told me to do. It's her fault." Eve, what did you do? "Well, I did what the serpent told me to do. It's his fault." And so the blame game is happening. It's the oldest game in the world, and it leads to these huge problems, to some terrible, terrible consequences that they've got to deal with. Adam is blaming Eve. Eve is blaming the serpent. The serpent is there, who is one of the roots of this cause. But if you really dive in and talk about what they're really doing, they're blaming God. It was that woman, Adam says, that you gave me. And Eve says, well, I fell because it was the serpent that was in this garden. It's not my fault. It's your fault, God. That's essentially what they're doing. That's what's happening. They are outsourcing the blame. Adam says, not my fault. Eve says, not my fault. It's all somebody else's fault. And if that's what they're going to keep doing, then they're going to have this cycle of irresponsible behavior where nobody's taking responsibility for what he or she is doing. The ticket's not my fault. The mistake is not my fault. The temptation is not my fault. The sin is not my fault. I could always find somebody to blame it on. But if I do, then it's going to lead to more and more problems. Here's what happens. We do things that are irresponsible. We look, just like Adam and Eve can look at their lives. They can look and say, God told us one thing to do. We are responsible for that one thing. All right? And they can say, well, we're not going to do that one thing. We're going to stay away from what God wants us to do. We're going to rebel against it. We're going to decide that we're going to want to do something totally different, irresponsible with what God has told them to do, and that leads to blame. All right, that's the progression. You've got irresponsibility, where you were told to be responsible with this thing. You didn't do it. I'm going to blame somebody else. Okay, well, we can tell you from experience with just a ticket that blaming somebody else for what you really are responsible for leads to conflict in our lives, right? If you're blamed for something that you feel like you didn't do, then you're going to maybe be angry about that, and you're going to be upset about that, and it's going to lead to conflict in a relation. If you're the one who is blaming somebody for what you really are responsible for, but you're trying to outsource that and put it on somebody else, then you are going to be the creator of this conflict in your life. It's going to lead to problems. It's going to lead to some destroyed relationships and some really tough issues that have to be addressed in our lives. And maybe one of the biggest problems is that if you go to Genesis chapter 4, you see that this cycle continues. Adam says, well, I'm not responsible. Leads to blame, leads to conflict. Eve says, I'm not responsible. Leads to blame, leads to conflict. And then they have sons. Their names are Cain and Abel. And one day they're out and they're going to go make sacrifices to God, and Cain makes his sacrifice and Abel makes a better sacrifice that is more acceptable to God. Cain gets upset about it, right? And you know the story. Cain goes and he murders his brother, and the blood of his son cries out to God from the ground. And so God goes to Cain and he says, Cain, where's Abel? And you know what Cain says in response to that? Am I my brother's keeper? Well, implied, yes, Cain, you should be caring for your brother, and you shouldn't be losing your brother, and you definitely shouldn't be killing your brother, but you've shirked this responsibility, and I've got to believe that Cain got that honest. That's what he learned from mom and dad, because dad says, well, it's not my fault, it's mom's fault. Mom says, well, it's not my fault, it's serpent's fault, and both of them are saying it's not our fault, it's God's fault. He put us in the position in the first place. It's the oldest game in the world. It starts with the first people. They're our roots. And it starts with them. And we can blame it all on our roots, but let's not just stop at blaming it all on our roots. Let's learn from our roots. Let's learn about their mistakes. And let's learn from their mistakes so that we don't repeat all of those same mistakes in our lives. If you're looking for somebody to blame, you can always find somebody. If you're looking for a way to shirk responsibility, I'm not telling you anything new to tell you. You can always put it off on somebody else. You can always find a way to get out of it. But I got to ask you, have you ever respected somebody more when they excused their way out of responsibility? No. That's not how it works. That's not how any of it works. God created us for responsibility. He created us to bear some of the burden ourselves. He created us to shoulder the load that he's given us. And whenever we put that off on somebody else and we shirk responsibility and we try to find a way out of it, it leads to blame, it leads to conflict, and nobody ever respects anybody more after they've excused their way out of a situation. All right, so there's the problem. We're pretty good at blaming. We're pretty good at outsourcing it and putting it off on somebody else. And my bad is a phrase we don't hear nearly enough. We never respect anybody more once they've gotten out of their responsibilities. That's not how it works. So what do we do? What do we do? Well, it all comes to this idea of a pie. All right? And I was going to put a picture of a real pie up here, but I thought better of it because last time I put food on the screen, I lost you. I don't know. So there's the pie. All right? What I want you to do, this is the two takeaways. Look at the pie. And the first thing we got to figure out is how are we going to cut this pie? All right, that pie symbolizes, it's kind of representative of all the conflict and all the problems that you've got in your life. And the orange slice of pie, that might be things that people at work, they bring to you, and they want you to deal with that problem. The blue slice, it might be problems that are family problems that people in your extended family, they're kind of heaping on you. The yellow slice might be something else that's going on in your world. But here's what I want you to see. You got to cut the slice, right? You got to cut the pie. And you put it into slices. And what I want you to focus on is which parts of your responsibilities and your problems and the conflicts that you've got in your life, which one of those come from the red slice? Because ultimately, we've got to admit that I can't really do a whole lot about the orange slice, the people at work. I can't really do a whole lot about what they're bringing to me. They live their lives. They make their choices. You're not responsible for that choice. Or the blue, or the yellow, or the green. Ultimately, we got to say, I don't have a whole lot of control over those slices of the pie. But you guessed it, you do have control over the red slice. And so I want you to think today sometime, you probably don't have time to do it right now, but think about your problems and your conflicts. Think about the responsibilities you've got in your life. Which ones are your slice? And once you figure out what's your slice, you got to own that slice. Okay, just like you don't want the orange people and the yellow people and the blue people, you don't want them loading their problems onto you, right? That creates conflict and blame and a lot more problems. What we're learning here is that if a problem's in the red area, I don't need to throw it off on somebody else. Turn your Bibles with me over to Galatians chapter 6. Now, we're going to talk a little bit more about this concept next week, but this is a pretty good spot just to throw it in. Some of that sounds unchristian, and I get it. If I'm talking about, if we're saying that, that part that's in their slice, that's their job. I know that sounds like it's against some of the teachings of Christ, but here's where I think we've got to go. Galatians chapter 6, he says in verse 1, if anybody is caught in any transgression, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of gentleness. Keep watch on yourself, lest you too be tempted. Verse 2, he says, bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. All right, so let's go back to the pie there, Michael. Okay, so bear one another's burdens and you so fulfill the law of Christ. Well, doesn't that mean that I should take all the burdens of orange, blue, yellow, and green all on myself? Shouldn't I be bearing all that? No, that's not what Paul is saying at all. If you skip down here, look at verse 4. He says, let each one test his own work, and then his reason to boast will be in himself alone, not his neighbor, for each will have to bear his own load. Okay, so Galatians 6:2, Paul says, bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. And the law of Christ is love God and love your neighbor as yourself. And so it's a loving thing to do, to help and to be available and to be a shoulder to cry on and an ear that's going to listen. It's a loving thing to do, to love your neighbor as yourself. But Paul also says each is going to have to bear his own loads. And we're going to talk through the rest of Galatians 6 next week, but that's where this pie comes from. And so what we've got to do, if we're going to figure out, learn from our roots of how we're not supposed to behave, here's how it worked for Adam and Eve. You ate the fruit. That's a red problem, right? Adam, you ate the fruit. It was your choice to take it from your wife and to put it in your mouth and chomp on it and eat it, and you got to bear the consequences because it happened in the red area. That's your responsibility. That's your job. That's what you messed up on. Now, you can say, well, it was orange. It was Eve. Or you could say it's yellow. It's God who did this. But no, Adam, it's not. You got to deal with your slice. Eve, same way. Hey, it was the serpent. Well, yeah, okay, serpent's in green maybe because that's just who he is. But no, Eve, it's not the serpent's fault. It's your fault. And so you got to slice the pie in your life. Where's your conflict? Listen to your blames. Listen to whenever you get the ticket, what are you trying to blame on? Whenever things don't go well, where do you try to place the blame? Whenever you got problems in your life, are you trying to figure out how it's not your fault? where you're slicing the pie and owning that red slice and admitting, like Adam needed to admit, this one's on me. It looked good. I thought it was going to taste good. I thought it was going to be good for us, and so I ate it. That'd be the simple answer. Instead, he said, well, it was orange slice. It was her fault. Eve should have said, well, I thought it was going to be good for us. I thought the fruit was going to be great, and so I ate the fruit. I know what you said, but I violated it anyway. That's owning a slice. And that's not what happened. In Genesis 4, it could have been the same thing. Cain, what have you done to Abel? I'm going to own it. I got mad. I got angry, and that anger led to a terrible decision in my life, and so I'm going to own it and say, I killed my brother. But instead, he outsourced it and said, am I my brother's keeper? So here, this is where we come. We're looking at our roots. We're talking about how we need to live responsible lives. And what that's going to mean as we go through this series is I'm responsible for me, and there's going to be a time when I got to say that I'm responsible for others as well. But it starts with owning my slice and thinking about the conflicts and the problems and the mistakes in my life. And I've got to figure out, how can I own it? How can I stop putting the blame off on somebody else? How can I quit, putting it out there and creating conflicts in my relationships? How can I start owning my responsibilities? What I've done, what I've said, the choices that I've made. I got to quit blaming, quit putting out there on somebody else, and own it for me. And maybe you're in the same boat. And we can look back at our roots, and we can blame it all on our roots, and we got it honest because Adam did it, and Eve did it, and Cain did it, and we're coming on down this line here, and we got it honest. We blame it on our roots, but don't just blame it on your roots. Learn from their mistakes. And today, commit to owning your slice, to taking responsibility for who you are, and for what you do, and for what you say, and for what your life is today. And this morning, if you look at that life, and if you decide today that there are some changes that need to be made, and maybe one of those changes this morning is that you give your life to God. You realize that ultimately Jesus has gone to the cross to take responsibility for those sins, to take our sins upon his cross, on his body, on that tree. And maybe this morning you decide that I'm gonna make this change in my life, and I'm gonna give my life to God, and I'm gonna become a Christian. I'll be a child of God, and I want to have my sins washed away. Maybe that's the change you make today. Or maybe it's something else. Maybe you're gonna come to God just as you are right now and admit the faults and admit the mistakes and commit to not blaming those on somebody else. And the outburst of anger that you had this morning, don't blame that on the spouse. Or the destructive choices that you're making in your life, don't blame that on your friends. Blame it on you. Cut the pie and own your slice. If that needs to show up in repentance in your life this morning, then let's do that. If it shows up in us offering a prayer on your behalf to God's throne this morning, we want to pray for you. We want to help you through this process. If it means that you give your life to God and you're baptized into Christ this morning, then let's do that. Let's slice the pie, own our slice, blame it on our roots, but learn from our roots and take responsibility for what God has put on us today. If you want to make any kind of change this morning, we invite you to come while we stand and while we sing Just As I Am.